Hi guys, welcome to Ani-Lab. In an MMORPG game, some adventurers are surprised that a party dared to attempt the Calamity Monster quest. In this game, when your HP reaches 0, you die and can never log back into the game. Soon, they find out that the party trying to clear the quest is a notorious group, a combination of unique members who are all awesome in their own rights. The most significant of them is a girl that can see the future. With a joint effort, the party called Subaru defeats the Calamity Monster rather easily. Later, the group discusses taking on a new quest called the Mysteries of Darkness. Asahi claims there's a strong level boss, but Clive reminds her how weak the notorious dragon was. Since no party has been able to defeat the boss and the last ones who tried only lasted a few minutes, Haruto decides it's a worthy challenge for his party. During the prep for the battle, Satsuki eavesdrops on Haruto and Asahi's conversation. Instead of observing further, she jumps to a conclusion. Afterward, they all head in to clear the quest. Soon, they start complaining about how easy the quest is. Meanwhile, Satsuki continues to wallow in jealousy. When the boss arrives, he conjures countless swords in a flash. With the help of Asahi's prophetic art sense, they launch their attack on the boss. As they fight, the boss simply regenerates whenever he takes damage. While Satsuki is a master wizard, Clive uses his ability to slow down the enemy. Next, Haruto charges in, but the boss targets Nozomi, who is providing support from behind. Haruto quickly comes to her aid, but as he wards off the attack, he gets hit from behind. Immediately, the boss fires a beam at Haruto, so Asahi runs into the attack. Days later in real life, Asahi becomes unreachable. They soon find that she died when her character in the game was killed. Although the investigation claimed the game had nothing to do with her death, Takanori blames Haruto for the tragedy. Several years later, the game initially called Union is relaunched and a friend persuades Haruto to help complete his team. Although he refuses the offer, after multiple persuasion, he agrees to help out. When he logs in, his new teammates mock his simple equipment. The first sign of a weakling? They soon head into a cave and the real weaklings show themselves. While they freak out, Haruto one-shots the monsters easily. Just then, the cave begins to transform into a more modern space. After exploring for a while without encountering any enemy, they find a box. As usual, they make Haruto open it on their behalf. When he does, he finds Asahi sleeping within it. On seeing her, Haruto's face darkens with despair. Outside, Asahi acts completely normal, so Haruto accuses her of being an imposter. He doesn't want to believe it's the real Asahi, but apparently, there's no 6 years gap in her memory. She even recalls the day before their last quest, but still, Haruto doesn't buy the charade. When she checks the date and is surprised she actually lost 6 years of her life, she tries to log out. However, the option isn't available for her since her account is restricted. When she asks about the team, Haruto finally tells her she died 6 years ago. Although she takes it as a joke, not long after, some men led by Leonovich, an old nemesis from Union, try to recruit Asahi because of her prophetic art ability. She refuses, claiming she is still a member of the party Subaru, and so Leonovich loses his patience. When he dashes at Haruto, he lands a solid blow. This makes everyone surprised that the invisible Haruto lost his ability called Sense. When he attacks again, he tries a feint, but with Asahi's sense of prediction, she helps him avoid the hit. Just then, Takanori shows up along with a group called Illuminati, so when Leonovich attacks, he uses his ability to rip his clothes. After being disgraced, Leonovich and his party retreat shamefully. Later, Takanori tries to help Asahi figure out her situation. However, he doesn't want Haruto to come with them. They begin arguing and he leaves when Asahi refuses to abandon Haruto. Although Asahi finally accepts everything that happened, she makes the most ridiculous suggestion of reforming Subaru. In the real world, Satsuki pays Haruto a visit. Inside, he learns Satsuki had been playing Reunion like Takanori. He then reveals he doesn't plan on returning to the game ever again, and this makes Satsuki angry. Although she leaves the house angrily, later when she logs in, Haruto takes Asahi to meet her. She immediately spills everything about her death, burial, and how her death was the end of Subaru. Just then, they are ambushed and both sides of the bridge are blocked by a nasty group. However, when Satsuki activates her abnormally numerous magic circles, they get scared. It's unfortunately too late and they have to suffer a barrage of magic attacks from Satsuki. Meanwhile, a group called Lightning also makes plans to capture Asahi, but Takanori and his party succeed in making them give up with a simple threat to their lives. While Haruto tries to clear his head, he is approached by a girl named Alicia. Apparently, she is an empath who can read people's thoughts. She reveals that Asahi's sense is different from the 6 usual types and that her ability has to be awakened before the big guilds come for her. Meanwhile, Satsuki and Asahi get into an argument where Asahi calls her nothing but residual data. Although Satsuki seemed mean, Asahi comes to realize that her death traumatized Haruto and her reappearance is hurting him. The next day, Asahi and Haruto take on a quest on their own. They battle different tree monsters in search of a drop item. She uses her cunning to get one eventually, but ends up drenched. She then decides to go naked like it was normal, thereby making Haruto uncomfortable since she is a kid in an adult's body. Afterward, she uses the drop item to make their old party ring in the blacksmith shop. Satsuki arrives, but is perplexed that Haruto literally put the ring on her left ring finger with no care about the significance. Seems like someone is jealous. Immediately, she goes on to make her ring, but she doesn't dare to ask Haruto to put it on her. They head to investigate Asahi's memory loss at the location of their last quest. Here, they find Alicia, who opens the portal for the floor boss. This time, it is enraged and quickly blocks off their exit. With no way to escape, Satsuki launches an all-out magic barrage that unfortunately proves ineffective. Next, she gets caught in the boss's attack and also puts Haruto in harm's way. Asahi comes to their rescue, managing to slow it down before getting hit too. While Haruto struggles, he notices his old ring on the floor and he becomes motivated. This also releases his previous fighter sense, and so he attacks the boss repeatedly until it is defeated. Outside, Asahi suddenly collapses and all 3 of them have a glimpse of her memories from the past 6 years. Although none of them understood it, they head into the inn only to find everyone staring suspiciously at them. Upon investigation, it turns out their feet in the dungeon had begun making the rounds in town. That afternoon, they encounter Southern Cross Guild led by Leto. They demand that Asahi be handed over to them, but before they can finish intimidating Subaru, another group called the Brill Society led by Angelus shows up. After Leto's retreat, Angelus proposes an alliance. He explains that their existence in the game will bring more fighting, but he can stop it. In search of more clues, they head to the Tower of Heaven and begin fighting 2-headed monsters. They soon arrive at the boss level, but since they had already cleared the stage, the first round was a breeze. For the second round, Satsuki is taken in the cover of the fog. Haruto goes on to finish the boss off while Asahi cares for Satsuki. When they notice how strange she had been acting, she gets mad but doesn't say anything. At the top, Asahi finds the drop item in her list. While she examines it, Takanori takes it from her. He explains that his divinity senses tell him the stone is something dangerous. He then goes on to accuse Haruto of putting Asahi in harm's way. The two get into an argument, and so they decide to battle it out in an isolated space. As they battle, Takanori reveals he plans to stay logged in forever if it means being with Asahi. This idea doesn't sit well with Haruto, so they have a big exchange. At that moment, the isolated space is destroyed by Satsuki, so Takanori leaves with his allies. The next day, Haruto and Asahi arrive at a village in search of Clive and Nozomi, their former comrades. Unfortunately, they don't get any useful information from the broker. Later on, Satsuki joins them on their quest, but they soon find themselves trapped in a fog. The trio is separated simultaneously by the alliance of 3 big guilds. Haruto learns that Takanori made the Southern Cross, Brill Society, and the Illuminati team up. He passes a message to Satsuki trying to buy her by explaining how Asahi's disappearance in the real world would be favorable to her and Haruto's relationship, and how that would help him. However, Satsuki gets pissed and launches an all-out attack on the group. At the same time, Haruto single-handedly engages his foes. As he falls at a disadvantage, Alicia aids him out of the blue. Her arrows seal the senses of whoever they hit, thus making everyone defenseless. Meanwhile, as soon as Asahi is rendered unconscious, Takanori's subordinates turn on him. It turns out Angelus betrayed him and hypnotized his guild members. As they try to salvage the situation, Asahi is abducted. That evening, the two guilds announced their merging since they had successfully acquired Asahi and her prophetic sense. Determined to do anything to save Asahi, Haruto finds himself about to engage over 3,000 members of the new guild. While he fights alone, Satsuki tries to get through to Takanori. Meanwhile, Haruto is hit by a powerful blast from above, but that isn't enough to end him. He continues to lay waste to everyone in his way, but soon gets bound by a chain that sucks away his fighting sense. Just then, he is saved by Takanori and Satsuki. Since they've always been teammates, their perfectly synced movement makes them run through the enemies like a hot knife through butter. Inside the castle, they notice the walls have crystals blocking magical elementals. The enemy then uses Asahi's senses to battle Takanori. Since they can anticipate his every move, he is quickly caught and bound. With Satsuki powerless without her elementals, her life flashes before her eyes slowly. As a last resort, she uses a skill to summon elemental kings who all lend her their powers. With this absurd power, she lays waste to the remaining minions at once. Fearing their defeat, Angelus uses a technique to transform Leto into an unhinged monster. Fortunately, his rampage makes Asahi conscious. Together, they use a combination technique from the Old Union to slay the rampaging Letos. After defeating the Guild Alliance, they board a ship owned by a lady called Alwida. Haruto explains they are in search of an unbreakable sword in the middle of an area called the Lost Pentagon. After wasting some time looking in vain, Asahi decides to follow her intuition. By doing so, they find the sword, which turns out to be Pleiades, Haruto's weapon from Union. When he tries to pull it out, there is an earthquake, and Agar, the king of the Dead Sea, awakens. As it happens, Agar is the evolved form of their nemesis, and so they begin the rematch. As they battle the thick-skinned beast, a third party shows up to assist, revealing himself to be Clive. With his help, they manage to hold back Agar before going back to the surface. Later in the real world, Takanori invites Haruto and Satsuki over. Here, he reveals that Gnosis, another high guild, were responsible for spreading word of Asahi's revival around. He adds that they've also been erasing anybody who tried to investigate them from Reunion. The next day, Clive shows up for a rematch against Agar. This time, they use a spell that lets them move freely in the water. They begin their attack, using their skill combination just like old times. They outsmart Agar before luring and freezing it rock hard. When Haruto tries to retrieve his sword, he is suddenly stabbed in the back by Clive. Immediately, Haruto finds himself in the hospital. Here, Asahi comes to visit and reveals he had been in bed for 6 years. When the others come, they have no recollection of the new game Reunion. In his confused state, Alicia gets through to him and reveals he is in a world created by Asahi's prophetic art. She adds that senses can also be used in real life, and Asahi unconsciously chose a different path that is now his reality. She reveals that Union is actually a testing ground to observe senses in real life, and Gnosis is the one pulling the strings. The next day, Haruto manages to escape the fake reality with Asahi's help. Back in the game, he stops Clive's attack in time. After engaging him, the new foe transforms into his real form, a shapeshifter pretending to be Clive. The enemy controls Agar and reveals himself to be a member of Gnosis called Simon. The group is attacked simultaneously by the merged enemy, but Satsuki's magic holds off the attacks. However, her shield breaks and she is held hostage to make Asahi awaken her senses. Luckily, she is saved by Clive, who had been with them all along disguised as Alwida. Simon then summons an attack that leaves the core of the earth shaken, and although Haruto holds it off, Satsuki and Clive disappear. It turns out they used the commotion to prepare for the finishing move that soon leaves the big beast defenseless. Next, Haruto leads the charge to draw out Pleiades and defeat the monster. When a new red crystal is revealed, it shows them a vision of Alicia locking Asahi's senses in a red crystal that shatters into many pieces. Some days later, Satsuki asks Haruto to invite her to a dance party before haphazardly confessing her feelings to him. Meanwhile, in real life, Takanori reveals he plans to ask Asahi to the dance, but since Haruto doesn't seem to care about love, they get into a fight right in front of her grave. While Takanori beats the living daylight out of him, he finally admits he loves Asahi, but still, Haruto brings up a more powerful argument and calls him childish. After Haruto admits his feelings for Asahi, Takanori gives up and reveals it was always his plan to get him to admit his feelings. Later on, he turns down Satsuki and soon, the two rejects find comfort in their company. During the party, Nozomi logs in to be reunited with Takanori. However, when she finds him dancing happily with Satsuki, she runs out in disappointment. Outside, she is approached by emissaries from Gnosis. 10. The next day, the group visits Nozomi's house after her mother reports that she went missing the previous day. After some investigating, Clive explains that Nozomi logged into Reunion and that she is still logged in, just not from her house. When he mentions that she's in the Dragon's Fortress, they immediately assume something might be off. Arriving at the place, they find that it looked more like a fairy castle than a game. They surmise that Nozomi used her senses to create the castle, and inside, they find themselves surrounded by Nozomi's familiars. They immediately battle the rather weak monsters together, but soon, they encounter Nozomi waiting like an evil witch from a fairy tale story. Just then, the dream mage, Cerinthus, and Mark-Ion reveal themselves. Revealing she has joined Gnosis, she and Cerinthus begin the show again. However, this time, Mark-Ion uses her artifact to absorb every attack thrown at her. As they battle, Nozomi secretly plagues Asahi with a curse and reveals it would kill her before the next day runs out. The next day, Satsuki explains that Nozomi saw them dancing and assumed they were a couple, and Gnosis took advantage of her state to turn her against them. Just then, they notice their reality distorting confusingly. A strange man appears and begins addressing them while he freezes time. Upon witnessing firsthand the use of a sense in real life, they rush back to the game to check on Asahi. Meanwhile, Asahi has a dream where instead of following her orders, Haruto makes his own move and leads the guild to victory. They get into a fight, but she is woken up before things escalate. When the group assembles in the base, the roof suddenly collapses, but they manage to teleport, thus foiling Gnosis's dirty attempt at ending them. Once outside, they decide to head into another fortress created by Nozomi's senses. Inside, Asahi begins recollecting her dreams, which makes her act strangely. When they arrive at the boss's room, they find Nozomi waiting for them. Although they try to get through to her, their efforts prove ineffective. And so, Nozomi activates a skill that summons countless familiars while turning into a chimera herself. In her new terrifying form, she orders her familiars to attack Subaru. As they clash, Asahi struggles with Nozomi's curse, making her unable to use her senses. Meanwhile, Takanori decides to take responsibility for his ignorance by forcing Nozomi underground alone. Here, Takanori lets Nozomi land all her hits, proving how desperate he is to save her. Although he explains the misunderstanding at the dance, Nozomi continues to attack out of guilt. Using his ultimate skill, Takanori manages to break her out of Gnosis's evil mind control. At the surface, the group continues to battle the menacing foes and their annoying artifact that absorbs things. Haruto and Clive manifest clones to attack, but Cerinthus's guns prove to be a hindrance. With Satsuki's help, they finally get the duo backed into a corner, but Haruto gets distracted by Asahi's mindless muttering. With the curse finally taking full effect, Asahi dreams of Haruto attacking her, and so she shoots him in the game. Afterward, she immediately comes back to her senses. Plagued with the guilt of Haruto's demise, Asahi begins to awaken. As a result, they find themselves at a disadvantage and Clive is captured. Just then, Alicia shows up to save Clive. As Asahi continues to glow uncontrollably, Haruto awakens his senses and calms her down. Finally, every member of Subaru is accounted for and ready to turn the table on Gnosis. However, they are surrounded by the annoying artifact again. This time, Haruto unleashes a powerful technique that rends the artifact like a piece of paper. After returning to the real world, Takanori accepts Nozomi's romantic feelings in person. The next day, they all come together to carry on the legend of Subaru in Reunion. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on another video. Until next time guys, take care.